forget what it was on the History Channel. It had to do with the American Revolution. And it was about Benedict Arnold. She knew the name, but she never knew that Benedict Arnold was associated with being, if someone called you that, you were called basically a traitor. And of course, the reason why Benedict Arnold was called a traitor is because he was a general under George Washington, and he fought in many campaigns. And General Washington considered him a friend as well as a comrade in arms. Well, things didn't go exactly as they wanted the war to go. And of course, Benedict Arnold had pretty much spent his entire fortune equipping his own army and trying to fight for his country. He decided that he was going to use his position so that he might rebuild some of what he lost. And in doing so, a lot of the people and even some of the other generals had basically told General Washington that Benedict Arnold was profiteering from the war, which was a treasonable offense. Washington at first defended Benedict Arnold. In fact, he even gave him an appointment to take command of West Point. It was a fort that was overlooking the river, which kept pretty much the colonies free from any British incursion. Well, Benedict Arnold, somewhere along the way, kind of decided that he was going to go over the other side. He was going to actually surrender West Point to the British. It was one of the biggest betrayals in the history of our country. And if you were called a Benedict Arnold, people took that pretty serious. Well, way before Benedict Arnold, in the time of Jesus and for many, many centuries, if somebody called you Judas, it pretty much had the same meaning. It meant that you were not only a betrayer, but a betrayer of the worst kind. Think about it. Judas had been with Jesus for 3 years. For 3 years, he had watched and heard and had witnessed all that God and Jesus had done. Not only that, but the group had entrusted Judas with the money so that they could buy things they might need or give to the poor. Judas was somebody that they thought they could trust. Absolutely. Just think how many times and how many miles they walked roads together. And how many nights they sat around the fire talking and getting to know one another. And even on the night that Jesus was betrayed by Judas, Jesus does something rather remarkable. He knew what was to happen, and yet he still washed the feet of Judas. He still treated this person as a loving friend. Sometimes that's hard for us to understand, because if somebody would do that to us, if somebody would betray us that way, it would be very difficult for us to separate the sin from the sinner, as we are so often taught we should do. And yet Jesus says that's what it is we should do. That's part of the healing process, by the way, is to be able to forgive the person their actions. Now, we may have a hard time forgiving that person, or we may want to stay away from that person and have nothing to do with them, but it is up to us to forgive them. And in forgiving them, that is where we sometimes begin to heal. I know of people who have had very difficult times doing this, that they've had people betray them. And in that betrayal, they hung on to that so much that there was so much hatred that built up inside of them that they became physically ill. Their immune system just could not handle it. And so, not only would they get just common colds and other illnesses, but after time wore on, their bodies began to wear down. And it wasn't until they learned to forgive that they were able to receive physical healing. Now, this evening we are coming together so that we might experience the healing that Jesus does give for us. And a lot of times that does not mean in the physical sense. Jesus teaches us, shows us that a lot of times healing takes place spiritually first before any physical or mental healing is able to take place. That we are made one with Him so that we might become strong. And that sometimes physically we may never be healed. If we look at the Apostle Paul, he of course prayed to God about those thorns in his side, even though we don't know what they are, and a lot of people have speculated of what this condition could have been. Nobody really knew. But he prayed to God. And of course, God did not answer the prayers in the way that Paul thought he should. Paul wanted to be healed, and God told him that in his weakness, he would find God's strength. And so for the rest of his life, he was still in the same physical condition. And yet, he was healed far beyond any physical healing. He knew that whatever it was that afflicted him, God was stronger than that. And that even in his condition, God could use him to do His will. I have found a lot of comfort when I read that, especially in all that's gone on the past few years in my life. There's been a lot of healing that's had to go on, a lot of healing that continues to go on. But I have found out that the spiritual healing far outweighs the physical healing. That God is able to use me in my brokenness to reach out to others who are broken in many ways. And to let them know that He understands. And most importantly, to let them know that they are forgiven and that they are loved. And that is what I hope we experience this evening. That we hear the words of forgiveness from God. That we feel the touch of His hand. That we know that we are His beloved children by way of our baptism. And that God loved you so much that He sent His Son into this world to die on that cross so that you might have life and have life eternally. Tonight is a time for healing, a time for forgiving, forgetting, of letting go, of asking God to make you whole once again. And that is my prayer for all of us, for those who are here this evening and for those who may be somewhere else. I pray that God will make them whole in mind, body, and most importantly, in spirit.